Yo, what is happening, guys? It's GM Cody back again for another video this week. And yeah, this week we are looking at something really cool and special. We are looking at Warhammer 40,000 First Edition Rogue Trader. Oh yeah, baby. Now, this is a reprint that I received from GW quite a few weeks ago, maybe about a month ago is when I got it in. And so kind of inspired me to do this review. I finally got my hands on a copy after all these years of not being able to get a hold of one, but I finally got a hold of one. And yeah, I've looked through Rogue Trader before I had this reprint because I've had friends in the past that have had the book, so I've had the opportunity to play it before and look through the book. But I've always wanted a copy for myself, and I've always wanted to play some more games of it, so it's really cool to have the reprint. Now, I don't know if this is still available or not. I think this was a limited time thing, like they usually do with a lot of things, which is unfortunate. It was print on demand, and I ordered it back like the day, like I pre-ordered it the day they put it on pre-order back in like October, and it took that long to arrive. Now, I will say, if these are still available, or if you can get your hands on one, this print copy in particular is really damn nice for print on demand. I was pleasantly surprised by the quality of this book. It is very high quality and very cool. And this, you know, like the scans and stuff are, you know, fantastic. The paper quality is really good. Binding's really good. Everything's really good about this. So I'm very, very happy to get this. And I have been playing a few games of Rogue Trader on for the past few weeks with my old hammer buddy Jack. So that's been really cool to play some Rogue Trader. And tonight we're going to talk about Rogue Trader. We're going to look through the book. Now, this might take a couple weeks. I don't know. Just it's going to take as long as it takes, really. But yeah. So the first thing I should mention is Rogue Trader is a very different kind of game than any other edition of Warhammer 40,000. This is very, very much a completely separate and different type of game right off the bat. So, you know, this game was not really designed to be, you know, a mass combat game, and it was definitely not designed to be a competitive, like, mass combat game in its original conception. Rogue Trader was originally designed to be more of a narrative skirmish game with heavy RPG elements. Now, a lot of people call this a role-playing game. This is not a role-playing game. Just because it has a game master doesn't mean it's a role-playing game. But it does have some role-playing elements, which is really not that unusual if you look at a lot of older war games from that time period. A GM was a very common thing, very commonplace in a lot of wargaming back during this time. So that doesn't surprise me at all. And in fact, it's still pretty prevalent if you hang around some of the like historical gamers. Of course, you know, which came from this era. You know, a lot of the older historical gamers still play that way, right? If you go to a historical club, you know, there's a guy that's going to bring everything for everybody to set up. He's going to have the scenario, and he's going to referee the battle and do all that stuff. So that's not really, you know, that's still a thing. And I think it's a little bit of an oddity for people that have only played, you know, future versions of Warhammer 40,000 or modern war games to see a game master and just automatically assume that it's, you know, they just automatically call it a role-playing game when it's not a role-playing game. It's still a miniatures war game, but it does recommend a game master, and it definitely has role-playing elements to it. But I just wanted to make that clear for a lot of people, because that term gets thrown around a lot with when people are talking about Rogue Trader, and I don't think that's necessarily fair to just call it a role-playing game. It's not a role-playing game. It's still a miniatures war game, okay? So don't be confused by that if you've never looked at Rogue Trader. If you have, or if you've played it in the past, which I know, you know, a lot of you older guys watch my channel and have definitely played Rogue Trader in the past. You're very familiar with this, but I did want to explain this to somebody that's never been exposed to, you know, Rogue Trader. So yeah, you know, Rogue Trader was the brainchild, of course, of Rick Priestley. It was released in 1987, and it was the game that was never supposed to be made, really, right? So, at the time of Games Workshop, Rick Priestley was really one of just a couple game designers at Games Workshop, and they were mainly producing stuff for Warhammer Fantasy Battles has already come out, and they had Warhammer Fantasy Role Playing, I believe, came out before this. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong. And so they were mainly focusing on fantasy stuff because they thought fantasy is what sells. In fact, there's Rick Priestley said that Brian Ansell said that one of the mantras at Games Workshop during this time, during the 80s, was science fiction doesn't sell, right? So Rick Priestley had this game in the back of his head for quite some time. And originally, apparently, he was conceiving to do a science fiction spaceship game. But then it slowly turned into a science fiction skirmish game using the same kind of course, using the same rule system as Warhammer Fantasy Battles, which, at the time as well was more on the skirmish side as well. So he started converting miniatures from toy soldiers and other fantasy miniatures and whatever science fiction miniatures he had hanging around, and started running these. He called it, at the time, they just called it Rogue Trader. That's what everybody called it that was playing it at the time. He started playing these games at his house that he shared with some other people, apparently. I'm not sure what all the story is behind that, but they would play on the floor, and they would play, and Rick would run them through these science fiction scenarios. And of course, this is where a lot of these things got created. So Rick was creating this game on his own time. And throughout the 80s, he kept asking Brian Ansell if he could make this game, and Brian kept saying no and no and no, until the latter part of the 80s, Games Workshop got a huge influx of employees from TSR, the British division of TSR. And in doing so, they inherited a lot of other game designers. So now, besides there just being 2 or 3 game designers, there was a host of game designers, a number of them. And so Rick was free to work on other stuff that he actually wanted to work on. And then he approached Brian Ansell again and said, let me make Rogue Trader. And Brian Ansell finally gave him the okay. He said, yes, you can do it, but you got to do it on your own time. And apparently this is, something I was made aware of recently, and I was talking with somebody recently too about it, is a lot of these guys were making these games in their own time and then presenting them when they thought they were ready to the company. Sometimes they get permission to do it, and sometimes they were just off doing it, right? So Rick Priestley was doing this on his own time. He wasn't getting paid to design this game. So he continued the games in his house and started writing the book. And I think he said he did it within the same year, if I'm not mistaken, all within, the year 1987. He was working on this book and typed up the manuscript and worked with all these artists. Now, there were some stipulations when he was making this game. One is, Brian Ansell said that he couldn't have any aliens in the game, right? Number 2 is that they were not going to make any new miniatures for the game, which quickly got thrown out later on when they realized it was going to be a success. But originally, they were not going to make any new miniatures for it. And the other part was that he had to interject all the fantasy ranges of miniatures that Games Workshop or Citadel Miniatures was already producing at the time. Make sure that they could use the full line of fantasy stuff they already had. And the original plan actually was that they were going to use conversion packs that you would buy to convert your fantasy miniatures. Of course, that got thrown out the window pretty quickly as well. So Rick went off, and he, with other people's involvement, of course, too, the whole GW studio came up with ideas, and of course he was inspired by the art and things, created the wholly unique, or not wholly unique, but wholly interesting and very cool and, well-loved, Warhammer 40,000 universe. So yeah, you know, the Warhammer 40,000 universe, and you'll especially see it in Rogue Trader, is definitely a combination of all things that Rick Priestley and company really loved. Right? They just whole cloth like stole all kinds of stuff. So you'll see Dune in there. You'll see Star Wars in there. You'll see 2000 AD. You know, the Judge Dredd stuff and Rogue Trooper. You'll see Doctor Who in there. You know, you'll see a whole host of things in there. It's Starship Troopers, right? You know, you'll see a whole host of things that Rick Priestley loved and all the other guys at the studio loved, that he just kind of took, you know, whole cloth or just took bits and pieces of, and created his own like stories behind all this stuff, right? So he took a lot of heavy inspiration from a lot of things, and they were not afraid to hide it in this edition. Of course, later on, they Warhammer 40,000 became its own very unique property towards the end of Rogue Trader, and they definitely tried to sweep all that under the rug, but the evidence is still there, clearly. But nonetheless, I don't think, you know, this is a bad thing at all. I think it's an awesome thing, actually. So there's a lot of nods and winks to other source materials and a lot of inspiration from a lot of things that these guys loved. And so, yeah. So we're going to take a look at it tonight. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the rules. Now, I'm not going to go really in depth about how to play this game or anything. This is not a tutorial. This is just an overview of the game itself, just because, you know, I'd like to, I just want to talk about it, but also I think it'd be cool to show a lot of you guys that haven't seen Rogue Trader what some of the differences are, and how cool this game really is, and that it's still actually pretty cool today and still playable and neat. So, without further ado, let us take a look, shall we? So here we go. Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader by Rick Priestley, right on the cover. And of course, we got this very iconic art piece here. Very, very cool picture that was carried over to, you know, second edition too, of the Crimson Fist Marines making their last stand here. And I think it was John Civic who did this piece. And there's a whole host of cool artwork in here. And of course, this is our first glimpse at the now very iconic, you know, Imperial Space Marines. Yep, so there's a splash page. Here's kind of the setup here of the universe. This is like the first text you see, and I will read this. For more than 100 centuries, the Emperor has sat immobile on the golden throne of Earth. He is the master of mankind by the will of the gods and master of a million worlds by the might of his inexhaustible armies. He is a rotting carcass writhing invisibly with power from the dark age of technology. He is the carrion lord, the Imperium, to whom 1,000 souls are sacrificed every day, and for whom blood is drunk and flesh eaten. Human blood and human flesh, the stuff of which the Imperium is made. To be a man in such times is to be one amongst untold billions. It is to live in the cruelest and most bloody regime imaginable. This is the tale of those times. It is a universe you can live today if you dare. For this is a dark and terrible era, where you will find little comfort or hope. If you want to take part in the adventure, then prepare yourself now. Forget the power of technology, science, and common humanity. Forget the promise of progress and understanding, for there is no peace amongst the stars, only an eternity of carnage and slaughter and the laughter of thirsting gods. But the universe is a big place, and whatever happens, you will not be missed. So this really, I wanted to read this because this really sets the tone for everything that'll be Warhammer 40,000. This dark, gothic, grim, dark science fiction universe that really, you know, was nothing like we had ever seen before. I mean, there were things similar to it, but this was a very different kind of science fiction universe than we were used to. This was not the science fiction universe of glittering starships and swashbuckling heroes in space and stuff. This was not Buck Rogers. This was not Flash Gordon. This was not even Star Wars or Star Trek. This was the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. So here we go. More splash pages, contents. So here they're going through all the different types of equipment and the books you will need, how many players you should have. Of course, they recommend you should have a game master. And as I was talking about before, this game is really set up to be a narrative experience where a game master would set up the scenario, write out a brief for both players, which we'll look at an example when we get to the back of this book, and referee the game and the circumstances that happen in the game, not just the rules, but also might have random events or whatever the game master can imagine, and just make sure that the game is run smoothly. So that is a big part of this game they recommend, and I think it does really help for this game to have a game master. Dice, of course, you use 6-sided dice, but this game also uses a set of polyhedral D&D dice. So you've got D4s and D6s and D8s, D12s, D20s, and all that good stuff. Here we have another really fucking awesome piece here. I didn't read off all the artists in this book, so the art in this book is amazing, right? And it's the who's who of awesome old Hammer artists here. You have Ian Miller, which, Jesus Christ, I love Ian Miller. Tony Ackland, Dave Andrews, John Blanche, Carl Critshaw, Colin Dixon, Angus Fieldhouse, David Gallagher, Jess Goodwin, Tony Hugh, Pete Nifton, Martin McKenna, Ali Morrison, Trish Morrison, Bob Naismith, Tim Pollard, Will Reese, and Stephen Tappan. So, it's just, an amazing amount of art talent here. And, some of the coolest art from the time, I think, ever. I mean, this art throughout this book is just awesome. Field of battle. So here they're talking about how to set up your battlefield and terrain. And of course, we got some old school terrain setups here. We got the trees with the lichen around it, the lichen itself, which I still use in games. Just rocks from the garden. Whatever these are, stalagmites, I suppose, just made out of something. It looks like they were made out of like modeling clay or something and just painted. You got some rivers here. Some of these cool little huts, which I think they tell you how to make these at the back of the book. Some hedgerows straight out of like a World War II game, which I've made these before too for World War II games. You just take like a piece of, foam and cover it in flock and put some lichen on it. Hills, these pancake square hills, which are really cool. Some more rocks, some really cool old school terrain ideas. I definitely remember, even back in the 90s when I played, this was the type of terrain we would use, There's another really cool art piece here, the Chapter of the Dark Brotherhood. Killer stuff. All right, troop characteristics. So here's all the characteristics, profiles, if you will, of your models in the game. And it would look pretty similar to you if you've played any other version of Warhammer 40,000 or Warhammer Fantasy. Now, the difference here is that there are some additional characteristics that are a bit different. So you got the usual stuff here. You've got movement, you've got weapon skill, ballistic skill, strength, toughness, wounds, initiative, attacks. But you also leadership, but you also have intelligence, cool, and willpower. And leadership, intelligence, cool, and willpower are made on 2 6-sided dice, and you try to roll under those skills. Which I do think a lot of these really add to the narrative if you're playing a very narrative kind of game. These could really add some cool narrative to your game. And we'll see later what those are used for. And we got some pictures, first pictures here, some miniatures, some Space Marines, and some regular just like power armored Inquisitors or whatever. And here we got some really cool pictures of like some of the first 40k models. We've got the original Eldar. We've got a Inquisitor in power armor, which he just looks like a Space Marine. Really, that's been converted. Another Space Marine here with a skull on his side. Some squats. Another Eldar. an orc, Dark Angels, which the Dark Angels were black at this time. Some Slann, you know, these guys are awesome. Blood Angels. We have an Imperial robot here. The infamous Zotes with like the gas masks and stuff. Some more power armored dudes, some orcs. A medic, which I love this dude's flag with like the medic symbol on it. And of course the old school dreadnought with the you know, all the slogans and stuff on it. Very cool. Organizing troops, you know, of course it's, you know, telling you how to organize your squads, and most of the squads assume that you're going to have 5 men in a squad, and there's coherency, of course, and that's 2 inches. It says, yeah, most squads be between 5 and 10, and most of the squads, it seems like they're, for most of them, they shoot for around 10. I mean, 5. So, movement. Well, let's talk about the turn sequence first. So the turn sequence, you have movement, then you have shooting, you have hand-to-hand combat, you have reserves, you have psionics, and then you have rallying. So movement is when you move your stuff and also declare charges. Shooting, you shoot. Hand-to-hand combat is when you resolve charges. You do hand-to-hand combat. Reserves is kind of like running. But there are stipulations to when you can make reserve moves, and we will look at that here just in a little bit. But basically, you can make an additional move if your troops aren't in cover or whatnot. Psionics, of course, you can take psionic powers if you have psychers and cast psionic powers. And psionic powers work quite a bit differently than they do in future editions, and we'll definitely take a look at that. And rallying, of course, you can rally your troops. Movement. Of course, you can move up to your movement allowance. I think for the average human, it's 4 inches in this game. Encumbrance, heavy weapons and equipment will slow you down. Now, they will slow down your movement, but there are ways around that if you have special gear like suspensors and such. Difficult ground, of course, slows you down to half rate. Very difficult ground, it will slow you down to a quarter rate. And impassable terrain is stuff you can't actually cross. And here we get this, you can't really see it very well, but we get this 2-page spread here. This, I think it's a dreadnought fighting against all these orcs. So if you had the book, you could see the whole thing here. And I love all these little like sidebars, all this, you know, fluff and lore it interjects to you as you're like reading through the rules. Yeah, splitting units. You can actually split up your squads. So the way that works is you roll an initiative test. You can split up your squad, and then you have to give that squad orders, and they will try to carry out those orders. So such as, you know, hold that ravine and take cover, or scout the ridge and report to enemy, blah, blah, blah. And of course, after at any point, they will go up and obey their orders, and then they can return to their squad when they're whenever they just have to continue moving in the direction of the squad they originally came from. There is facing in this game, of course, and you have 90-degree. I think you have a 90-degree arc, if I'm not mistaken. No, it's more like 45 degrees, I suppose. Something like that. Turning, any model can be turned once up to 90 degrees, either before, after, or at some point during movement. This incurs no penalty. Each additional turn up to 90 degrees occurs a penalty of -1/2 inch from the total move distance. Now, I will say we completely forgot about these rules when we were playing Rogue Trader the past couple weekends, but you know, that is actually a rule that, you know, you take a movement penalty if you move, if you turn any more than 90 degrees. Obstacles takes half your movement. Unit coherency, we already talked about that. Shooting, so we already talked about that you have like a shooting arc, And we can't forget about this cool picture here, the Space Marine being shot up here. And it's interesting in the diagram here, the shooting arcs, they have all these different bases, I guess because at the time they had like a mix of different types of bases. So they were just showing you whatever types of bases you were using. This would be the arc on that base. Line of sight, of course, is very similar to what you would see, I don't know about now, but in a lot of other future editions of 40k, where you know the models actually have to see a model to shoot, of course, and that, you know, certain obstacles might block line of sight even if you have literal line of sight. And then of course, you know, woods have their own special rules, so you can see 2 inches outside and inside of woods. And if you're inside of woods, your ranges are halved essentially if you're both fighting in the woods. Hiding, you can hide just like you can in like 2nd edition 40k, which is cool. Shooting from elevated positions, so it just tells you that, you know, you have better line of sight from a elevated position. You can see over obstacles and such. Cover, of course, if you're behind cover, like some kind of obstacle or ruin or a wall or whatever, you get a bonus to cover. Rules for discovering hidden troops, and that's based on your initiative characteristic. Pretty similar to the 2nd edition rules, actually. Ranges. So you have short range, long range, and maximum range. And you could get a bonus or penalty depending on the type of weapon you're firing at whatever range. There are other modifiers, of course. You get a bonus for firing at a large target, penalty for firing at a small target. Firing from a moving surface like a vehicle, penalty. Firing at a fast target is a penalty, etc., etc. So there's a lot of different modifiers here that you add to your final dice score. Of course, you roll 6-sided dice just like you do in every other version of 40k, and it's the same formula that was tried and tested forever. It's 7 minus ballistic skill gives you the total you need to hit. So the same formula we know and love forever, right? Or you can just look at the chart here. You know, you look at your ballistic score and it'll tell you what you need to hit, but the formula is 7 minus ballistic skill. Of course, we talked about the range modifiers. Minimum hit is always a 2. No modifier may take the score needed to hit below 2. Maximum hit, of course, if it goes above 7, you can still hit. You need to roll 6, and then you need to roll an additional hit depending on what that total number is. So if it's a 7, you need to roll 6 and then a 4. 8, you need to roll 6 and then a 5. 9, you need to roll 9, then a 6. And I think a 10 is as high as it goes, just like in 2nd edition. Damage scored, this is like kind of like 2nd edition too. Certain weapons deal more damage than just a single wound. So, you know, if a model has multiple wounds, after you hit him, they get a saving throw. Well, you hit, and then you have to roll the wound. And then they get a saving throw. If they have more than one wound, they usually just take one wound, unless the weapon deals multiple amounts of damage, and that will be in, using the D&D dice. And of course, saving throws are very similar to what they were in future editions of 40k. And, you roll a number depending on what type of armor you're wearing. So, Caraspace armor is a 4+. Power armor is a 4+ in this as well, until later on they redact that and it becomes a 3+. Mesh armor is a 5. Flak is a 6. And certain weapons give a modifier to whatever type of, to a save modifier depending on what type of weapon it is. Area effect weapons. Before we talk about that, here's the wounding chart, and it's the same as future editions of D&D. And the way to work this out and memorize it was always, if it's the same, so if the weapon strength, let's say, is 4 and their toughness is 4, it's going to be a 4. Now, if you're 1 higher than your opponent's toughness, it's going to be a 3. 2 higher, it's going to be a 2, and so on, so on. So that's how that works, and you kind of memorize that after years and years of playing Warhammer, and don't even have to look at the chart. So area effect weapons work a little bit differently in Rogue Trader. So you do use blast markers in this game, and they have everything from a 1/2 inch to 2.5 inches in a blast marker. And the way this works is you don't roll the hit first. You roll to see if the place the blast marker over a model, and then you roll to see if it deviates first. And depending on what size the blast marker is, will tell you the chance it has to deviate. So the bigger it is, the higher chance it has to deviate. So you roll to see if it deviates first, and if it does deviate, you roll what is it? You roll a d6, and then you roll a d12. And that D12 you use like a clock to, it starts at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, et cetera, to see where it scatters from. Of course, nowadays we have scatter dice, so you can just use a scatter dice, and that works just as well. And then any models that are under the template, you roll to hit, and you roll to wound, just like normal. Firing into hand-to-hand combat. You can't fire into a hand-to-hand combat in Rogue Trader, but you have a 50% chance of hitting your own guys from doing so. But troops in hand combat cannot fire out of hand-to-hand combat. This is talking about open-top vehicles, bikes, horses, etc., and that from a long-range hit, you might have a chance to hit the vehicle, or you might have a chance to hit the crew. And it's basically a 50% chance. Firing from a moving vehicle. Models firing from a moving vehicle or riding animal may only do so at short range, apparently. Slow weapons. These type of weapons are move and fire, basically. There are move and fire weapons, basically. Following fire. This is a really interesting thing. And this is kind of like the sustained fire or multiple shot rules that you'll see later on in later editions. Now, it works very differently than it does in other editions. So if you have a following fire, you roll to hit, you roll to wound. If you wound, if you actually cause damage, then you can pick out a new target within 4 inches and keep rolling to hit and wound until a shot fails to score wound. Now, this following fire is really deadly in this and kind of crazy. I played it in a game this past weekend, and one of my squad leader took out a whole other squad in one turn by himself with this rule with a pistol. So this rule is really crazy, but also kind of cool. It kind of gives that effect that you see like in the movies and stuff, where that one dude is just mowing down all the mooks. But it can be pretty ridiculous too. Hand-to-hand combat. Of course, you charge double your movement. You have to be in base combat. You can use multiple weapons. If you use multiple weapons in close combat, you actually get a penalty to hit with both weapons, but you get to, you get the same amount of attacks with the second weapon that you do with the first weapon. So if you have 2 attacks base, you take 2 attacks with your base weapon, and then you take 2 attacks with your off weapon too. So that's really cool. But the penalty is pretty steep. It's -1 to hit with the first weapon, -2 to hit with the other one. Basically, the way combat goes, it goes by initiative. You roll to hit, and this is very similar to the Warhammer Fantasy system and also future editions of 40k we would see. Now, second edition and Rogue Trader 1.5 in the rules compilation had a completely different combat system. But this combat system is very similar to what you would see in Warhammer Fantasy 3rd edition and all the other versions of Warhammer Fantasy. And also, every other version of 40k up until, the latest editions use this chart where you go weapon skill versus weapon skill, attacker versus defender's weapon skill. Now, the one thing about the Rogue Trader weapon skill chart is that it's actually harder to hit than it is in future editions. So usually, like in 3rd edition onwards, if you have the same weapon skill, it's a 4 to hit. In this, it starts off at a 5. So it's actually, it's really hard to hit things. And on top of that, you also have penalties and bonuses. But combat can be a little bit of it can turn into a little bit of a slog because things aren't hitting as often unless they have multiple attacks. Is one thing I noticed. And in fact, next time I play Rogue Trader, I'd probably use one of the updated weapon skill charts or the alternate combat system that was introduced later on that is would be very familiar to anybody that's played 2nd edition 40k, which is a completely different kind of system. But anyways, that's how close combat works. And of course, you roll a wound, and you still get armor saves, and weapons still have, armor penetration, all that stuff. Here we have another cool picture of a Marine commander, apparently. That's cool. We have this cool, shady-looking Space Marine here with a flamer. Here it's still going on about close combat. So if you lose a close combat, the models can actually be pushed back, which is very similar to Warhammer Fantasy 3rd Edition, where the loser is actually pushed back and the winner can pursue. And also, if a unit's pushed back, where is it here? Well, if they rout, the unit can actually, pursue them. And the opponent is pretty much helpless. They don't get to fight back really. I don't remember exactly how this works. I'd have to look into it. But basically, it's not good for the defender if they're routing and get hit in close combat. I mean, it's basically, from what I understand, it's pretty deadly. I haven't had this happen yet, so I'm not exactly sure how it works. I can't remember, but essentially, it kind of works like that. But there is the pushback thing, which is really cool. Of course, route and pursuits. We were talking about routing. Moving routed troops, move 4 inches away. Rallying, of course, in the rally phase, you roll 2d6 and you roll equal to or less than the unit's leadership. And then they can do nothing for the rest of the round, but they are rallied. Pursuing, of course, we talked about that. And you have to take a leadership test to see, to stop yourself from pursuing. Otherwise, your guys just become impetuous and pursue anyways. Reserves. This is kind of the reserve move we were talking about, where you can make another move if your guys did not shoot. Basically, the stipulations are the model belongs to a unit with no members within 4 inches of any enemy. The model did not shoot in the shooting part of the phase. The model is not in or behind cover, and the model is not hiding. And then you can make a reserve move. And this is very similar to, the March rules from Warhammer Fantasy, right? Psychology. So psychology tests are taking on cool. The cool stat, which is very cool. And you roll 2d6 and try to pass under your cool. And you have things like fear and hatred. And I think that's the only... Confusion is in here too. And frenzy are the different kinds of psychology that are covered here in the main book. Buildings. Here's all the rules for buildings. And they actually give rules here where you can actually map out the interior of the building if you want to do that. So if you enter the building, you'd go on a little mini map and have... a fight in the building, which is really cool and interesting if you're, doing a narrative game or anything. Vehicles. So the vehicle rules are very different than any other version of 40k. Of course, this got updated a couple times in the lifespan of Rogue Trader, but as they're presented in the core book. The vehicle basically has a profile very similar to what every other model in the game has, which is very similar to how the game plays today. Actually, it's kind of similar to that. So there are no like armor values. There's no like in second edition. There's none of the different armor values for different parts and the charts and stuff. Basically, you're trying to beat, you're trying to wound the target against the vehicle's toughness, just like you would any other model. And then the model also has damage points, or wounds, depending if it's another, like a dreadnought has wounds or damage points, and that's how much damage they could take before the vehicle's damaged. The movement rules are what you would imagine. Now, turning is a little bit different. You actually turn on this radius, and this can be a little confusing. So radius equals speed times turning radius ratio, and every vehicle has a turning radius ratio. And then this gives an example of how that works here. And honestly, I don't think everybody uses this because it can get real tedious to do. And most people just kind of come up with some kind of house rule or use future editions rules or whatever. Boarding and leaving vehicles, of course, you can do that. If the vehicle didn't move faster than 10 inches, you can board or leave a vehicle. It does say here, like, drivers and vehicles can shoot, and other models can fire out of vehicles. Hits on vehicles. So if you deal damage for each for 1 point of damage during the turn, just make 1d6 if special damage has occurred, and 1d10 to determine what damage. So vehicle. I forget how this works, actually. I'm sorry, I'm reading here. For each damage point above. Oh, okay, yeah. So if you sustain more than 1 damage point during a turn, you roll a d6, and a score of 6 indicates some special thing occurs. And of course, there's modifiers for that if you sustain a lot of damage. And you roll a d10 here and add some modifiers to see what happens. You could lose weapons, systems, vehicle could blow out, power loss and all kinds of stuff. And the dreadnoughts actually have their own special damage table as well. And of course, you can move out of control, which is very similar to how it works in second edition. You could have collisions. Here we have the rules for dreadnoughts, which are very similar to the other vehicle rules. And here's the special damage table for the dreadnought. Robots, again, very similar. Now, later on, they would introduce additional rules for robots where you actually have to program the robot. But there is something in here about that as well where you have to give them orders, which is interesting. I don't know if I would actually play with these rules, but I might try it out at least once. It's pretty cool where you have to actually write out the orders for what the robot's going to do during the game. And robots also have their own damage table too. There are rules in here for aerial vehicles as well. Now, I haven't tried these rules. I haven't read these rules. I know nothing about them. But there are rules in here for flyers, which is really cool. And they also look fairly complex as well. But I never really had a desire to introduce a flyer in my game. But it would be cool to have like some special mission where you have like a vehicle, like a squad could call in like a strafing run or something. So that's cool. Personalities, here's personalities. For making characters, and you have champions, minor heroes, and major heroes, and here's the bonuses to their characteristics for being whatever type of hero they are. No characteristic can be above 10, of course. Random heroes, so if you want to generate your own characters, generating characters for a campaign or whatnot, it gives a system here for generating your own characters and personalities. Psychic powers. So psychic powers work pretty similar to how you. Well, okay, so how psychic powers work is you have psychic masteries of levels 1 through 4, and then you generate psi points depending on your mastery. So basically, it's basically 10 times your mastery, or you can randomly roll, and then you randomly roll to see what psychic abilities you have. And in order to cast a psychic power, all you have to do is spend that many psi points. If you have less psi points than you do the cost, you have to make a test to see if you can cast the psychic power or not. But if you have enough psi points, I believe you just cast the power. Yeah, if the psyker has 12 or more psi points remaining, he can use his powers without testing for success. They will always work. If the psyker has less than 12 points remaining, then he must test to see if his powers work or not. Test for success by rolling 2d6 equal to or less than the psyker's remaining psi points. The ability can be used. So that's how it works. You can get saving throws. You can enhance your psychic powers. You can also gain back psi points by resting. And here's a list of all the different psychic powers, which we're not going to go through all these, but you've got things like, you got some classics in here, right? You got Hammer Hand is in here. Telekinesis, Teleport, Aura of Protection, Mental Bolt, Cause Fear, Telepathy, Aura of Invulnerability, Cure Wounds, Strength of Mind. So all kinds of cool stuff. How are we looking on time? All right, I'm probably going to tell you what, we're going to pause right there. So we talked about psychic powers, and next week we're going to continue this, and we're going to look at the mutants section. And we are only on page 53 out of 288 pages. Actually, let's carry on. Let's carry on just for a little bit. Okay, so you have mutants, and it has rules for creating mutants. And this would be kind of like a little bit of a precursor to the Realms of Chaos books, right? Now, chaos wasn't introduced in this book yet. The concept of chaos, I don't think, is in here at all. If it is, it's only vaguely mentioned, but there are rules in here for random mutations and mutants, which is really cool. And so, here's all the mutant powers and, mutations, and you roll a D100 to see what mutations you have and what happens there. And here's an assortment of mutants here. A very cool picture. And here's some more here. These are awesome. I especially like this dude with the antenna eyeballs literally coming out of his eyes. But all these mutants are really cool. Point values. So they do have a point system in here, and I will tell you right now, it's not balanced. And they say so in here too, that, don't think that this is a balanced system at all. But there are some, we found out, because we did try to play straight out of the book. There are a few weapons and things in here that are costed a little too low. So I recommend, if you're going to, they work out, the points values work out fairly well. But I definitely recommend looking at the weapons, the profiles of the weapons, and see if it's balanced or not. I wouldn't worry too much about balance, really, but like some of the weapons are way undercosted. I'm looking at you, Shuriken Catapult. But, just take a look at some of the weapons before, if you're going to play this game and assign point values to them before you actually, go with the points they have listed here on the weapons. But other than that, the points values work out pretty well and will give a fairly balanced game. And you kind of have to work out the points values on your own based on the profiles and stuff. I think they do have like a chart back here that gives like a basic profile for all the different types of creatures. And then based on that, you have to add in, their equipment and stuff, and vehicles and stuff. You have to work out yourself, of course, and all the equipment and everything. And I think that's probably where we're going to leave off, because the next section is going to be the battle at the farm, which is the scenario here. That's probably a good place to leave off. So we're on page 63, and we will continue this next week. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this part 1 at our in-depth look at Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader, Warhammer 40,000 First Edition. Let me know if you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to give me a thumbs up if you did. It's much appreciated. I don't really care about the views or the clicks and stuff, but I just use those things to gauge if you guys are enjoying the content or not. And it makes me think about future videos and what I want to do. And of course, I judged this one based on the last Warhammer 40k video I did, which is on my love of just me gushing about my love of 2nd edition. And it seemed like you guys really loved that one. So hopefully you guys will like this one just as much. And we will be talking about some more Old Hammer stuff in the future. And some more wargaming stuff. I want to talk more and more about some wargaming stuff because that is, I have an equal love for wargaming as I do for role-playing games. And most of the channel, 95% of what I've talked about on here has been about role-playing games. But I really want to talk about some miniature games, and especially the old miniature games that I love and still play. And we're going to do a bunch of different stuff, not just looking at the rules, but I hope to do some battle reports. I'm trying to work out a good way to do that. I don't have a great video camera of anything, but I'm trying to think of other ways I can do like some short bat reps for you guys. And maybe in the future when I actually have some money, I'll get a better phone or a better camera so we could do like video battle reports. But I definitely want to do that. I'm thinking about doing some painting videos, just me hanging out and painting. And probably some more discussions and live streams and stuff about wargaming. But we'll see. I've got things churning in my brain. But anyways, I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. And catch you guys next week when we're going to look at part 2. It sounds like probably of multiple parts of Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader. Hope you guys have a good week. We'll see you next time. Peace.